Through my brother's networks, we had close contacts with dissidents within the Soviet Union, in the Baltic countries, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, and also in Eastern Germany or DDR. We had a totally different take on what was happening inside the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe from what was the conventional wisdom in the Western media. We were convinced that an entrenched totalitarian system of the Soviet type could not be reformed from within. It had to be abolished to start anew. Amalric's old question, will the Soviet Union still exist in 1984, was still very much on our mind. In other words, we thought that Mr. Gorbachev, however goodwill he would be, could not succeed. We saw the peaceful and democratic Baltic Revolution not only as an expression of nationalist uprising, but as the beginning or the end of the totalitarian system itself. This Weltanschauung influenced my thinking at that time in a fundamental way. Did we seek consultations with other governments in formulating and implementing this policy? Well, this begs another question. Whom should we have consulted? The US? The German government? The British, as guardians of the sovereignty of small nations forever? The French? Or the Spanish? Who? One of the things that I learned in those years, in trying to plead the case of the Baltic countries and reminding people not to forget their fate, was that political leaders in democracies very often have very short memories. The Baltic states had been wiped off the map, the geographical map of reality for almost half a century, and that is long enough time to be forgotten. I remember very well pleading with one foreign minister, a highly educated person from a southern European country, pleading with him on the Baltic issue. He gave me this answer: haven't these people always belonged to Russia anyway? He hardly knew that there was a period at all when they had been independent sovereign states recognized by his own country, among others. I have been made aware of the endeavor in recent years by representatives of the former US administration to take credit for what Iceland did by simply explaining to Baltic leaders that Iceland did what it did as a stooge or a proxy by the US government or the US State Department. In light of the historical evidence of the prolonged procrastination of the administration of Bush Sr. on the Baltic issue, I can well understand the need for some historical revision or beautification. After all, the Bush Sr. administration barely managed to be ahead of the Soviet Union itself in formally recognizing the restored independence of the Baltic countries. Is there any truth in this belated historical revision by US officialdom? My answer is very short and simple: none whatsoever. Did the USSR put pressure on Iceland before or after making the decision? Some people, also in the Nordic circles, have said that it was easy for little Iceland to tease the mighty Soviet Union on the Baltic issue, since Iceland was far away and had nothing to lose in its dealings with the USSR. Well, we generally don't expect foreign observers to be familiar with our history or the details of our foreign relations. But as a matter of fact, Iceland had, for specific reasons, developed close contacts and significant trade relationship with the Soviet Union during the Cold War era. Why? Already in 1948, Iceland adopted a really avant-garde legislation on the sustainable use of marine resources. This, of course, reflected our basic national interest as a coastal state and a major fishing nation. Consequently, Iceland joined hands with many other small nations, mostly developing countries, in Latin America, in Asia, in formulating a new law of the seas that took into account the interests of coastal states rather than the traditional advocacy on the freedom of the high seas, pursued for military reasons by the major naval powers. Step by step, those small countries extended their fisheries limits or economic zones from the 3 miles originally defined by the reach of British cannon used in their gunboat diplomacy of the British Empire around the globe. Thus, Iceland extended its economic zone to 4 miles in 1954, 12 miles in 1958, 50 miles in 72, and ultimately to 200 miles in 1976. And this result was ultimately given legitimacy in international law by the adoption of the Law of the Sea by the UN Assembly in 1982. This fight for the preservation and the responsible harvesting of marine resources brought Iceland into conflict with the United Kingdom and Her Majesty's government. Those were the so-called Cod Wars, 3 of them from 58 to 76. The Brits sent in the Royal Navy to prevent Iceland from extending its sovereignty and jurisdiction to over our coastal waters. This was a classical David versus Goliath conflict. Icelanders applying a sort of guerrilla tactics with small and swift gunboats, cutting the air from behind British trawlers that were supposed to be under the protection of naval frigates. Those behemoths turned out to be difficult to maneuver under those circumstances. So in the end, Iceland came victorious out of those Cod Wars. The British eventually had themselves to adopt the 200-mile limit, although it signaled the end of the deep-sea fishing fleet. Who were our allies in this? Apart from many other small and developing countries in Latin America and Asia, it was the mighty Soviet Union. When the British placed an embargo on Icelandic exports to the British market, traditionally our major market, the Soviets intervened and offered to buy all our products. This was the beginning of trade relations that lasted for decades. In return for Icelandic seafood exported to the Soviet Union, the Soviets supplied Iceland with all our oil and fuel, as well as trucks, heavy machinery, etc. The Soviet share of Icelandic exports was second only to Finland among the countries in Western Europe. And along with this trade relationship followed close contacts in other fields such as in cultural relations, student exchanges, etc. When Iceland started actively to support the Baltic independence movement in 1988-91, the Soviet authorities, to begin with, protested that Iceland was interfering into the domestic affairs of the Soviet Union. More than once, they rather angrily threatened to cancel those trade agreements. This actually caused serious worry to some segments of Icelandic society, such as the Ship Owners Association, who were not strong supporters for me anyhow, traditionally close to the dominant conservative party in Iceland. When Alþingi, the oldest national democratic parliament in the world, adopted a resolution of congratulations on the occasion of the same as Declaration of Restored Independence on March 11, 1990, the Soviet Union angrily responded by recalling their ambassador from Reykjavik. That traditionally is next door to breaking off political relations. We responded very calmly by maintaining that we were not at all intervening into the domestic affairs of the Soviet Union, since the invasion, occupation and annexation of the Baltic states during the Second World War had been illegal in the first place. We followed this up by forwarding to the Soviet government a detailed legal analysis which maintained that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was itself in breach of international law. We also cited Soviet obligations under the Helsinki Protocols to respect democratically elected parliaments and governments in the Baltic states and the obligation to uphold accepted principles of human rights. Realistically, we didn't worry too deeply about the Soviet threat of cancelling the trade relationships. High-quality Icelandic seafood had easy access to more remunerative foreign markets in Europe, Asia, and America, which proves the importance of free trade for freedom in general. Secretly, we made sure that Iceland would have secure supplies of oil and fuel from other sources. In this way, we felt free to speak our mind. Behind it all lay a reasoned assessment that the Soviet Union was entering its final phase of internal decay. Perhaps the peaceful and democratic Baltic Revolution could give it the final push. That, as we now know, turned out to be a correct assessment.